start this episode off really quick by wishing well my usual co-host and partner in crime, Mr. Matt Rainwater. He is currently dealing with the flash flood fallout that attacked his domicile last week, and we wish him well and hope that he gets all that stuff straightened out and he'll be back in a flash. But in his absence, we have an awesome fill-in guest. She's a very good friend of mine. I've known her since elementary school.
Yes.
Yeah, elementary school. We're going way back. She is a writer, a poet, an actress, a hardcore animal advocate, and like a bajillion other awesome things. Ladies and gentlemen, we have Toni-Ann Mastracchio on the episode today on Midnight at the Spaghetti Factory.
Hello,
Toni,
glad to be here.
We've been talking about this for at least
Ever.
probably since I've started. You've wanted to kind of jump on this, and
Definitely.
by the fortune of the gods above, we were able to make this happen kind of last second. But I'm glad to have you. And we're talking about a rather, I don't want to say it's a peculiar subject matter, but as I was advertising on Twitter, and I hope you don't take offense to this, but
It's a niche.
if someone were to look at you, I don't think anyone would assume that you had anything to do with Dungeons and Dragons, role play, gaming type stuff.
I get that a lot, and I love it.
I mean, for our people who are listening and not watching our YouTube version, Toni looks like she could fit right in with the cast of Keeping Up with the Kardashians.
Oh, thank you.
And I'm telling it like it is. So, first off, right off the bat, we're going to be talking about the whole art aspect of the RPG. Is that the right terminology? RPG?
Yeah, it's an RPG. It's
Okay.
essentially at its core that's what it is.
So we're going to get into the artistic natures of that. But right off the bat, I'm curious. You say you enjoy it when people don't expect it. Do you get a lot of pushback with stuff like that? Like people are like, do they look down on it with you? Because they like I feel like they would look at you and say, like, assume that you're doing it ironically or something.
Yeah.
Like you're just like fucking with people or something.
It's always kind of a surprise to people because people have this preconceived notion of what a D&D player looks like in their head,
Yes.
you know, which
Right.
we're probably all thinking it right now as we're listening to this. But yeah, and it's really just, that's the cool thing about the game. Like everyone plays. They might just not talk about it, but I've met females, males, old, young, you know, nerdy, not nerdy. Everyone plays it. So
I've never actually played it. The most exposure I've had to Dungeons and Dragons is the amazing episode of Community, which I
of course,
know
that's
you've
how I
probably
got
seen.
started.
Is it really? That's
Yes.
phenomenal.
We'll talk about that, I swear.
That was one of my favorite episodes, mostly because it dealt with mental health. That was really the
With Fat Neil.
subtext of what was going on. Correct, yeah.
Yep.
And then also a college buddy of mine, Sam Edson, who some of you may know or may not know. He starred in a indie film called Zero Charisma. And it was basically about a dungeon master who a hipster guy kind of shows up and overtakes his, I want to call it a clan. I don't know what a group is that plays on normal occasion, but he basically gets jealous and his mind starts going down a rabbit hole of craziness where he starts seeing Dungeons and Dragons in real life and sees this guy as an enemy he needs to overcome or whatever. But the point I'm getting at, that my only exposure is through that lens of another medium viewing it. So Community is what got you into it. I'm curious to know, how did you go about like finding, again, I don't know the right word, a clan or a party or
a campaign.
You know what I mean? Okay,
Well,
a campaign.
That's your first lesson.
All right, I'm taking notes.
It's called a campaign. That's what D&Ders refer to it as opposed to a game. They just call it a campaign. And campaigns can run along. So how did I get started, basically, is what you're asking?
How did you find the group of people that were, well, I mean, we talked about, preconceived notions because, I mean, A, you're a female. B, you don't look like the stereotypical person that people imagine for Dungeons and Dragons. So I'm assuming there had to have been probably, and this is a problem in like the nerd community, but there's a lot of gatekeeping. So I'm assuming that you might have run into some of that. And I'm just curious to know how you like overcame that.
So I saw this episode came out, 2010, 2009? It was a while ago. I was young. I was like, I don't know, maybe 24 or something like that. And I saw this episode. Obviously, it's an amazing episode. I loved it. I had heard of D&D. I've heard about it my whole life. It's been around since I think the early 80s, I want to say. I probably should have known that before I came on here, but it's been around forever.
Yeah.
And so what I did was I went to Barnes and Noble and I bought a Dungeon Master starter kit. And I just started reading the book and say, okay, and it's very complicated. And I'm sure we'll get into that too. So yeah, and then like your original question was, I'm sorry, I got sidetracked, was how did I kind of overcome that stereotype thing and like the gatekeeping? So if you're good at the game, you're respected. In order to be good at the game, you have to study the game. It's not easy. So right from the get-go, I didn't want to be one of those people that was just like, oh, I want to do this as a one-time thing. Like I wanted to play Dungeons and Dragons. So
you can swear too. I can see you're censoring yourself. You can swear. It's fine. Fucking swear.
Oh, thanks. I got into motherfucking Dungeons and Dragons.
There you go.
And then long story short, I told my brother about it and he had the same thing. Like, oh my God, I've been trying to get into this myself. And we started and we found like our friends were so into it. And at first it kind of started as a joke. Like, we're going to play D&D, guys, really? And then we loved it. We just loved it, and it became very serious. So yeah,
that's awesome. I didn't realize that. So it was basically a collective of people who had always in the back of their mind wanted to play.
Yeah,
but were kind of ashamed to admit it, and then like one person steps forward and makes the ball start rolling down the hill, and the next thing you know,
and you're breaking in. It's a complicated game, so a lot of people start researching it and realizing like, oh God, there's all this stuff I have to learn, and then they give up. But we didn't.
Now. See, I'm only coming through it from the community thing, and I know Pierce like reads the book that they were playing, and that was basically cheating. So does doing something like that considered cheating? So there's got to be a fine line there, right?
Yes, absolutely. So what Pierce was reading in that episode was the Dungeon Master's Handbook. The Dungeon Master is the gatekeeper. They're not actually playing, they're narrating the game. They might be playing the role of side characters, enemies, things that you might encounter during the game. It's all in the theater of the mind. But so my brother writes his own campaigns. So he doesn't go buy a book, it's his own book. And a lot of DMs do that. But the one that they were playing, and they'll be like board game sets sort of that come with a book. So if you look ahead, you're going to know it's kind of like a choose your own adventure type of thing. The players ultimately get the free will to decide, but the DM guides you.
So now that leads me into my next question, because again, I know this is all coming off community.
Yeah.
Much like Jeff Winger, he doesn't know what to do. Right when Abed's all right, so what do you want to do? And Jeff's like, what are my options? Is that laid out in the handbook, or is it 100% like free-flowing creativity right off the top of your head, whatever you want? Or there are limits as to what your maneuvers are as a character?
So there's limits based on your class and your level, which I'll get to in a minute, but you can do anything. If you want to walk up to someone and slap them across the face in the game, you can do that. I mean, and then certain campaigns I've been in have taken that silly turn where we actually had a house party in our last campaign. So as the DM, especially if you write your own stuff, my brother has to be ready at the drop of a hat to be like, okay, this is where the party's going. I got to have a storyline ready for that. So he will map out different, like, okay, they're probably going to do this. He'll kind of insinuate, oh, look, there's something really cool over here, guys, but we don't have to go do it. So it's complete and total creative control within the character that you choose.
All right. So it is like choose your own adventure, like those books.
Yes, very much.
Kind of acted out. So when someone's constructing it, there's a creative level of that psychology where it goes into trying to intuitively guess as to how other people are going to think and do this. So then the question I have is, as a dungeon master, which I don't know if you are or not, have you done?
No, I am not at that level yet.
So then as a dungeon master or as the player, is it in your creative benefit to think outside the box? Do you know what I'm saying? Like to go against what people are going to do and then Like, have you ever like caught the dungeon master with his pants down, where he's just like, I don't know how to go around this?
That's actually one of the fun parts of the game. And I think in that episode, Pierce actually finds some loophole or whatever. I can't even remember, but so we don't purposely try, like we're a group, we're a party. That's what it's called in the campaign, the party. So we try to stick together, but this is a 2-year-long campaign I've been in. So my brother, as the dungeon master, has gotten to know our personalities, but everybody just makes some wild card decision every once in a while just to shake things up.
I was going to say, because then you'd be limited by what character defining attributes are. So
right.
Do things carry over? Like in Community, Neil's had the Sword of Duquesne for like 11 years or something like that.
Yeah.
So like if your character loses an arm in a campaign, like 2 weeks later when you guys do another campaign, does your character have their arm back? Or
no, he lost his arm. His arm's gone. I mean, there is an infinite number of spells in the Dungeons and Dragons world that can possibly regenerate. There's lots of magic stuff, but no. And the other thing about D&D is if you die, you die. Like, you're done.
But so your character can be conjured back by someone. No.
Possibly, if you have the skills. So what you do is you do 3 death save rolls. Every move is determined by rolling a dice.
Okay.
So you can say, I do this, but you might not be able to do it depending on if you roll badly or well. So that's another component.
Interesting. And then,
yes.
So how do they, this is a question I again, because I was watching it. Is it just general discretion, guesstimation by the dungeon master as to how difficult a particular role has to be? You know what I mean? Like how high you have to get.
I see what you're asking. Done? No. So everyone has a character sheet. Mine is like, there's coffee stains on. This is 2 years old. It's terrible. But over here, and you can't see this at all, but there's all my stats. So for instance, my class I'm a warlock. That's what I chose. So warlocks are very smart. They're very cunning. And when you go in the player's handbook, it will tell you like, you're not going to have great strength stats. You're going to have, and they're called modifiers. So you roll a 20-sided dice. So say as a warlock, I said, I want to cast this spell. I have very good spell casting abilities, obviously, because I'm a warlock. So I might need on here, I might need sleight of hand. I might need charisma. I might need insight. And I have like a +5 on one of those, for instance. So I roll the dice and I add 5 to it because I'm a warlock. So if somebody is something else, like a barbarian, they can add to their strength modifier. It's very complicated.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
You don't have to actually roll a specific number. It has to be a number or higher.
Yes.
Right? In order to get it. So that's how they vary the difficulty.
Right. So if you're going against an enemy, the dungeon master will know the enemy's stats. You don't know them, and they'll know what number you have to beat to, get a hit on them or have a spell successfully work, for instance. And then, since it's a 20-sided die, there's something called a nat 1 and a nat 20, a natural 1 or a natural 20. If you roll a 1, it's horrible and just terrible things happen. If you roll a 20, you get anything you want. So nat 20s are really cool things that happen in the game.
So when you so you guys play like every week now, right?
We play every week, yes.
It's been like, has that been a pandemic thing, or has that just been in general? Oh, okay.
We used to play like once a month for hours. We could go like 6 to 8 hours in a session. Now we do 2-hour sessions once a week on Discord.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's an interesting way to do it. I would have thought you would have done it through Zoom or Skype or...
Yeah, I don't know. He has all these maps and stuff that he does all that stuff, my brother. Hi, Joe. And so he has all these maps. We also use this app called Roll20, where he specifically puts maps and grids and things like that. And you could actually roll dice in there as well. Gotcha.
All right.
Yeah.
So let's get into the artistic nature of it, at least from a player role. Because like I mentioned at the opening, you are a writer. You're also an actress. How much? Well, hey, listen, there's a poster behind me with the proof.
I have acted.
And then there's like random commercials that I randomly see you in that pop up on TV. So I'm curious to know is how in tune with it is to with something like improv. You know, like stand up improv type of stuff like that. Is it in the same lane, or is it more gaming than like creative? That's or is it a perfect blend of the two?
I would say it's very much more creative. It's not
Okay.
like, I mean, now I'm not a gamer in the sense that I don't play like our Call of Duty or Halo or things like that, so I can't really speak to that, but there is a significant amount of improv and characterization, and that kind of like whacks people in the face the first time they play because it's very awkward, especially if
Right.
you're not naturally, an actress, an actor, something like that. So you do have to role play. It makes it a lot more believable. It's better when you play with people you know, but like in our campaign, like we are our characters. When we log on, like I'm not Tony, I'm Celeste Corvax, the warlock.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so it's very much like this. It is acting. It is acting, absolutely.
And I gotta imagine it would help someone as an actor, because the objective of the game is much like how when you're acting, you're chasing a particular scene objective. You know what I
Right,
mean?
right.
Like it's not
Right.
nearly as dramatic more often than not as, steal the amulet from the dragon and
Right.
burn the castle down, but it's very much a much more defined, not formulaic, but like simple. I don't want to say watered down or anything. All the words that I can think of sound derogatory, but it's
I get
much
what you're
more
saying.
understandable for people to just understand, okay, this is what I have to do. It's objective based, and it can
Right.
translate into like an acting type of thing. So like, how far removed is it from like LARPing? It's
not very far removed from LARPing at all.
because LARPing is like one step ahead, right? It's like costumes and like plastic cardboard
and
swords.
you're physically acting out the actions when you're LARPing. Like, we're verbally acting this out. It is essentially the theater of the mind. As my brother says, we do have a board, we have some grids, some avatar pieces just for logistics. But yeah, it's without all the physical nature, it definitely is. And you also have to make decisions how your character would. And that's something that people struggle with at first too, because you might want, like Tony might want to do something, but my character would never do it. And I have to remind myself. It gets easier though as you play more.
Okay. But then you said occasionally you will mix it up and do something.
Oh yeah.
So how do you make those kinds of decisions as that character? Because you're not, as a writer, you understand that when you create a character, that's usually how you can create conflict and intrigue and move a plot forward and so on and so forth. But particularly when you're playing a game, it might differ a little bit because, you know what I mean? Like you're not trying to create conflict in a game, you're trying to achieve the objective. So, how conflicting is it when you're actually playing the game to do something that you might think, you know what? I'm going to shake it up tonight. I'm going to make this fun versus I'm going to get us to the goal faster. Like I can understand.
It's very...
There's gotta be... Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say there's roles there's 5 of us right now. I am very objective based. I am very like, we have this mission. I want to find out this knowledge. Let's keep going. Let's keep pressing forward. We do have people that want to shake it up or just like, well, here's a town. Let's go check out this town and go see the blacksmith and find information. And so there's different ways to play the game. And then one thing my brother does that is awesome is for the characterization is before we even started, he had us actually write like a whole essay about where our character came from, what our family was like, why we're here. Like it was like an assignment in school and we're like, oh God, Joe, we got to do this. But we go back to that and it helped so much because I go back to that. And I'm like, okay, this is my character's objective. So my character is very objective based and I can never forget that because I wrote this backstory for her. So
cool.
I don't know if that answers your question, but
if you remember, and now we're going to go deep cuts. When we did Digits, not only did I have you guys pick out the last names of your characters, but I also, I talked you guys into making Facebook accounts for the characters.
Yes.
Because I wanted them
that.
to have interactions with each other so that because we didn't really have rehearsal time. But I wanted everybody to kind of have an idea of how their characters would interact with different characters before we got on set. And I think that kind of translated, you know what I mean, is to the chemistry that all of you had because...
Oh, definitely. It was like real for us.
It was. And it was, as Steve Kinney, it was fun to kind of watch that. And the only downside was that I didn't record it or publicize it or anything like that. Like people could friend your accounts and this and that and kind of piece together what was going on. But you know what I mean? Like the only people that could really follow it were the people doing it. but that
Yeah,
worked in terms of the artistic nature of it. So I absolutely
absolutely.
applaud your brother for forcing you guys to do that.
Oh yeah,
That's
he's a stickler to care. Like he wants it, suspending disbelief is what it's about, and that's what he wants. Like he doesn't want us to be us. He wants us to be those characters, and it really works out.
and so now I don't want to go too far away from it, but we could actually. I mean,
Yeah.
you are so were you into Lord of the Rings before D&D, or did it kind
Oh
of
yeah.
translate into that, or was D&D kind of the thing that put or was Lord of the Rings the thing that put D&D in the back of your head? Because they're
Lord of
very
the Lord of the Rings came first. If
okay.
that like with the chicken and the egg, Lord of the Rings came first. But even before Lord of the Rings, what got me into fantasy was the Golden Compass, the trilogy, his Dark
Oh, okay.
Materials trilogy by Philip Pullman. Still my favorite three books of all time. But that I read that when I was 11 years old, and that was when I was like, okay, like fantasy. I just Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, everything I could get my hands on. Game of Thrones, a lot of sci-fi stuff, Hyperion. And and then so not Game of Thrones, sorry, Dungeons and Dragons came right between Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones.
Okay.
So yeah, but Lord of
So
the
what
Rings did kind of lay the groundwork for that.
so then do you find yourself as or do you find like D&D kind of being a muse for some ideas that sometimes you write for like fantasy stuff? Like I know like you've been working on certain stuff. We won't go into that on this particular
Yeah.
episode, but I'm curious to know like because for me when I'm writing, my muse is music. Whenever I'm listening to music,
Right.
I can take whatever fucking Spice Girls song and work it into a horror movie, and somehow people will be like, "You got that from that," and that's just how my brain works. But I'm
Yeah.
curious to know if, like, when you're in the middle of a campaign or something, does that kind of spark some creative things in your head, and then like you get done and you're like, tomorrow I'm writing because this is a good idea and it came from that. Is that
I
kind of a
mean,
muse for you?
I would say so. D&D definitely like as a muse. Yeah, I would say it is a muse. It's simplified things for me, if that makes sense. It's
Okay.
simplified things because when you think of all the greatest fantasy stories, when you think of Frodo and the Ring, when you think of Harry Potter, the Sorcerer's Stone, everything, it's all just a journey. It's an unlikely hero who has an objective, who goes through the steps of that hero's journey and either comes out the victor or dies along the way and goes through a whole bunch of bullshit during it. And that's at the base of everything, but also every story. So I look at my brother just making this content, and I struggle with creating content. I'm like, oh my god, how am I going to write a book that has this and all these elements? And I watch him just unfold little by little these minuscule details every week, and it sort of simplifies it to me and makes me feel like, well, I could do that. I could create 5 characters who are on a journey, and it's just these one little decision, and then the characters turn it into something amazing. And that also kind of speaks to that whole thing that we learn in every How to Write a Book about let your characters make the story.
Oh, absolutely.
And you always say that as well, like you give life to the characters and then you let them kind of make their choices, right?
I mean, that's what makes stories different. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
that's why
yeah.
when you watch a movie that's similar in genre or whatever it may be,
Mm-hmm.
when you watch a character make a decision that's not normally like it breaks cliche or tropes or whatnot,
Right.
that to me is what stands out. That's you know what I mean. Like everybody loves Willy Wonka. I don't know anyone who doesn't love the Gene Wilder Willy Wonka.
Oh yeah.
And it's because he acts differently than everyone else. He sees the world differently, and that is it's both unexpected and common. Do you know what I mean? Like it's the weirdest hypocrisy, but that's what resonates with people. So when you have a character who has a spine, I don't know if that's a word that's used in Dungeons and Dragons, but like that. So like if my goal today is, oh, I'm going to cook spaghetti. Yes. Yeah. But my long-term spine goal is, hey, I want to be a millionaire. Like there's a day goal and then there's the life goal kind of thing. So like the spine determines sometimes what the day goal is. If that makes any sense. So I can understand where, I don't know how I got on this tangent, but that particular thing could resonate, especially when you're writing down a backstory. So like when you were creating the backstory for your character, did you just, I mean, like that is probably one of the hardest things that even I struggle with is like sitting down saying, all right, this is all the shit that happened before the story starts. So you don't even know what stories you're going to be walking into. Did you kind of like shackle yourself with some of the things that you put in your backstory, or was that like, what was the process behind coming up with the backstory? Because that had to have been a solo creative measure, right?
So yeah, absolutely. And so when I make characters, I don't know if this is a bad habit or a good habit, but any character in a short story or whatever, it's always a version of myself, but more the self that I want to be, or think, oh, what would I look like, act like, and do if, you know, I jumped into a space-time continuum and it was the most badass motherfucker on the planet. And that's how I made Celeste Korvac. So she's very much me, but with this whole, and the backstory just came to me. I don't even know how to answer that. It was one of those rare moments of just creative energy. I'll have to send it to you, actually. It's like 3 pages long, and I'm like, oh God, and then she did this, and then she did this, and then like just all, you know, as if I was in a movie, imagining myself just kicking ass as this freaking warlock. So that was very, very easy to me, and because it was also very fun. And then the other part of that is it feels almost like cheating, because my brother and I, you know how close we are, and like we are of the same mind. So I know what kind of campaign my brother runs. And I know he's going to want
fair.
Dark elements in there and, you know, all this other stuff. And because I love animals, I have a familiar. It's a crow.
So, do the other characters get to see your backstory or your sheet or anything like that? Okay, so they know your backstory. They don't get to find it out as they go.
Every campaign traditionally starts with this group of travelers that are an unlikely motley crew that end up somewhere and have some mission. And usually the first scene is us talking. I'm so-and-so, this is how I got here. I'm so-and-so, this is how I got here. You know, and then there's the issue.
Kind of found or followed the mold correctly. They didn't.
Oh yeah. That episode was accurate except for how short and fast it went.
Well, I mean, you got 20 minutes.
It was fairly accurate.
And they told a great story in that particular 20 minutes too. That's the part that boggles my mind. As Abed calls it, it was a bottle episode.
Yeah.
6 people sitting at a table talking, and that was it. And it was probably one of the best episodes. I hate that they took it off Netflix, but still.
I know.
That's neither here nor there. We won't get into touchy topics like that. But I do recommend to anybody who's listening, if you have not checked out Community, you need to check that out, because it is a master class example in great storytelling, everything, production design, editing, you name it. I'm curious to know how... So Dungeons and Dragons was like alien to you before that, and you had kind of found your nerve to kind of start it. When had you first found out about it? Like, when was it, and like what was holding you back from doing it originally?
I knew about Dungeons and Dragons in high school. I don't know what was holding me back. I mean, I didn't really have that complex that some people had, like, oh, it's too nerdy, because I'm like queen of the nerds, you know, I'll do anything nerdy. But it was really just like not knowing how to get started. It's like, you know, when someone comes to you and says, how do I get started with karate or martial arts? It's like, I don't freaking know the first thing. I don't know where to go, who to ask. So I get overwhelmed sometimes. But luckily, my brother is a very pragmatic, you know, if it wasn't for him, I probably wouldn't be playing, because he was like, okay, we're going to learn this and we're going to do this. And within weeks, he's like, I have a team, I have this, I have a story, you know, so if it wasn't for him, I probably would have just wished that I did it and never did it. Okay, it's hard to get started. It's a lot to learn, and it's overwhelming. You know, you got to read.
First and foremost, you do know who to go to when you have martial arts questions. I'm not even going to begin to get into that.
I mean, besides, you know, it's just, that was a bad example.
It's all right. I'm just breaking your balls. For me, I know that, like, I don't want to say been exposed to it, but I was aware of it as a kid. But my mother was very, I don't want to call her a helicopter, but she was very protective of the content that I consumed as a child.
Yeah.
So, like, when I watch, like, Unsolved Mysteries now, and it's, like, episodes from the 80s, they talk about it's the satanic panic deal, where it's, like, Dungeons and Dragons was basically devil worshipping.
Oh,
These D&D players were, you know, the ritual people who sacrificed people on Unsolved Mysteries and shit like that. So I'm sure that's why I never really got a chance to play it. But
that's interesting.
I feel like there's a lot of creative merit that comes out of it, because I'm sure if I asked you right now, it probably doesn't come up a lot during gameplay, but if I asked you to describe her costume or well, her I don't know, uniform, armor, whatever you would use to describe it. I'm sure you have a mental picture of exactly everything and the way it is, like an accent, all that kind of stuff, the style of hair, the fighting style. That I mean, I don't know if she's a fighter because
yep.
And correct me if I'm wrong. Isn't a warlock supposed to be a male?
Yeah, so in D&D, there's no such thing as witch. It's just warlock. So I'm a witch, but it's just warlock. Yeah, there's different classes. Yeah, and then you get a background. You get a race as well. So I'm a human warlock. You can be a druid warlock. You can be you could be a gnome. You could be a bard. There's all different things you can be, and they come with their certain. It's kind of like, remember in Oregon Trail, if you were a banker, you had lots of money, but you couldn't fix a wheel axle to save your life.
Yes, I do remember that. That is a great analogy. So, what would you say is like the merit of playing D&D versus actually doing like the LARPing or what's that video game that was like the big hit that was kind of like Dungeons and Dragons? I don't know what it was called off the top of my head. I remember
Dark Souls?
Penny plays it in, I don't know if you've ever watched Big Bang Theory, but Sheldon gets Penny into
I
it.
don't like that show.
I listen, I used to watch that show and I gave up on it after a while, but there was an episode, I want to call it War of the Worlds, but I know that World of Warcraft. That's what it is.
Oh, wow, yeah, World of Warcraft.
Is that basically the same kind of gist, but a video game form?
It has different elements, but again, so that World of Warcraft is kind of like that sort of Game of Thronesy, medieval, monstery, what am I thinking? Catapults. I'm thinking of all medieval words that are not coming to my head.
Okay, so wait,
you can have that world in Dungeons and Dragons, or you can have a different world. You can have any world you want.
I didn't know that. I thought it was all medieval fantasy, like
if you
Renaissance fair people type stuff.
Right, like the books that they were using on Community, like those pre-written campaigns, a lot of them are like that. But like my brother's we don't have a time. It could be in the future. It could be, it's in a parallel world. It's very different. So you could have one that's under the sea if you wanted.
I was just about to say, you could create one that's on another planet, on a spaceship.
You could do a Terror House one.
So, okay, and this is something I was going to ask because I didn't know, and I was very curious to know if you knew this. Is there like a horror movie or like a version where you could do this, but like a horror version? Because I would sign the fuck up for that in a minute.
Okay, so good news. My brother and I have talked about this for years because we haven't actually found a pre-written one, but he wants to write one. And if we do that, you have to play.
I'm in. You don't even have to ask me twice. I'm in.
I'm a horror one would just be awesome.
Because, it's basically the same thing. You're trying to overcome an obstacle. Things are trying to kill you. There's supernatural elements. There's all that kind of stuff. Do they do things like, are there people who backstab? Like almost like Pierce did?
Oh, yeah. So
like, can your party turn on you or something? Like a mutiny?
Yes. So it's generally frowned upon.
Well, obviously.
It fucks a lot of things up, and then it can fuck the whole campaign up. But for instance, I'll just give you a little thing that happened with ours. So the name of our campaign is The Frozen Wastes Above. And basically we found ourselves in this place, this town, I won't get too far into it, and it was just frozen solid. And we're trying to figure out what's happening and get to the bottom of this. So in our travels, after like a year and a half of playing, one of our characters, his character name was Scroggins, I believe he was a gnome. And he found basically a space-time continuum, an abyss, and he jumped through it, and it was hell. So, no, literally hell, like the abyss.
Yeah.
So we all were like, what the fuck are we going to do? We got to go get Scroggins. So we all jumped in, and we suddenly went from the frozen wastes above to now my brother has to write an entire story about the abyss and what we find down there. And we're still not out of the abyss.
I was just about to ask. So does a campaign end in one night, or can it be like, we're calling it at 10 o'clock no matter what, to be continued next week?
We call it every night. It can never end. Like it's always like, so we'll finish a fight and then I'll be like, all right, because this is a campaign. We haven't figured out the deep freeze yet, and we haven't gotten out of the abyss. So there's no end until we do.
But your brother knows.
Yes, my brother knows what the goal is. We don't know. He knows what the overarching goal is. Like where he wants it to go, what he wants us to find out. But he has to, like I said, he didn't know we were going to jump through this freaking portal.
So how much? I wish we had had him on.
I know we should.
Because I'm curious to know if it's as much fun for him as it is for you guys. Because obviously the person who builds the bounce house isn't
Yeah.
having as much fun as the people bouncing in the bounce house.
Yeah.
But I mean, I gotta assume as a creative, person that coming up with the details or the stories or whatnot,
Yeah.
that's gotta be a good. And this is not meant to be derogatory, but I feel
Yeah.
like it's gotta be good practice. Do you know what I mean? Like one of those
Yeah.
things that they tell you like when you're writing is write every day,
Yeah.
every day. And sometimes you're just like, I'm not writing till
Right.
I'm done. And this feels like it's kind of like and one of the biggest motivating factors that can happen when you're a creative person, if other people are depending on you to have the shit done, that's a good way to do it. So like it'll force you to do stuff even when you don't want to do it. And then once you get started, I'm always toting that mantra. Once you get started and over that hump, it's all downhill from there.
And you and I have talked about this before too. Yeah, about that. Like when you have someone on your ass who's expecting something, it's a lot easier to. No, he's really good with that. And like that particular night when we went into the abyss, I remember we stopped like a half hour early and he's like, all right, guys, well, we're going to have to continue next week because I have to write a new story. It's very rare that he like gets out of character like that, but he had to write a whole new thing. So
is there homework that the characters have to do? Like when you're done, do you the next day think, all right, this is where we left off and this is what I think I got to do next? Can you cheat and like message one of the other party people and be like, hey, if you do this on your move and I do this, I think we can get this done? Like, is that allowed?
You could, but we're very, very good about it. We take it very seriously and we don't do that.
Okay.
Right. We even text as our characters. Like all these guys are in my phone as their character names. When we see each other in person, it's, oh, yo, Celeste. We're just ridiculous. It's like a family.
That's awesome, though.
Yeah.
I mean, it's in the dorkiest nerd way.
Oh, yeah.
That's awesome because, I mean, we all like to pretend we're other things or this or that. And I remember even when we were doing digits, I liked to pretend I was Steve Kinney.
Yeah.
I got to be impartial and yada, yada, yada. I was basically a dungeon master, right? Isn't that the whole thing?
Absolutely,
you have to be impartial. Because I remember...
Yes.
I remember people saying to me in a digits thing, it's like, why does Steve not get involved in what's going on? And I was like, oh, he has to remain impartial.
He has to be impartial.
the dungeon master, basically.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. So have you found it helped you out playing the game in terms of your writing? What can examples or stories, like what wisdom has come from that you've learned from playing the game that has helped you in your writing?
So the King story, the story that for people who don't know, there's a story that I've had in the back of my head for a really long time, and I started it, didn't finish it, but that came from this. So I was already in the campaign and I wanted to write something sort of old-timey, more medieval, not that ours is completely medieval, but just with that sort of esoteric language, I guess I could say. So that inspired me to actually get back into short story writing. But like I said, it's also simplified things. Like it doesn't have to be hard. A plot can be complicated, but the main overarching goal of, I keep saying that, the objective does not need to be complicated. Here we have, my brother's idea was there's a freeze. The world has frozen. Everyone's dying. What caused the freeze? That's it. And everything else is just an offshoot from that. And so sometimes I get overwhelmed with stories because I feel like they have to start off all complex and I have to have everything worked out. But if I just have that one idea, I can build from that if I have enough, backstory to my character. So that it's taught me that to basically simplify my plot lines.
And have you learned anything from the other character, like the other players, like the way they've make choices with their characters in this? Has that kind of broadened your view of what a character can and can't do?
Oh, yeah. Like, okay, we have this character. His class is called a cleric. So he's basically a priest and his name is Pious. And he's just like this. He's a pious man and his name is Pious. Okay. And long story short, I love his character so much. I am definitely going to use that character in one of my stories. Like he's just the most awesome, nuanced. My friend Matt plays him and he puts his heart and soul into this. Like Matt wrote a song. He's also a musician. He wrote a theme song for him that he played for us on the piano. Like Pius is like a real character and I'm going to incorporate him into a story. So yes, my fellow campaigners they're better than me. They're extremely skilled at I'm telling you, you should actually just sit in on a session sometime and see how we do it.
It would be interesting to just be a fly on the wall to something like that.
Yeah, you definitely should.
There was a question I was going to ask. So, okay, you said your character can die.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
What happens then? Do you become a fly on the wall? You have to sit there and just watch
Yes.
everything that happens? Or do you get a new character? How does that work?
So when you die, that means so HP is your hit points, just like in any good video game, you get a certain amount of hit points, right? And as you level up, you get more max hit points. And so when you get to 0, you're not dead, but you're out. And then if you get attacked, then you're dead. You get 3 death rolls. So you have a certain number to beat. That's a whole complex process, but you have a certain number to beat based on your character. And if you beat that number, I think 3 times, then you are not dead anymore. Huh. So you come back to 0 HP and you're stable. Oh, it's not 3 times. You get 3 death rolls. And if you fail all 3, you're really dead. So that's how it works. Yes.
But never coming back. No spells, nothing can save you.
You're not coming back. Not never, though. So what you do, though, so if you have a good dungeon master, he will somehow, if he could be a dick and just be like, you're done. The campaign's over. That's it. Or you could find a way to find somebody who has a resurrection spell or something like that. But we also have spells called Spare the Dying that can bring you to stable HP. So if you're able to give somebody that spell, gift them that before it's too late, you can do that. So there's options. But once you're dead, you're dead. So yes, you do become a fly on the wall until you find some type of resurrection spell.
So you wouldn't get another character?
You can.
I was gonna say, if you died, no one has a resurrection spell. Your dungeon master's like, I got nothing for you.
Yeah.
So the next week, you can't just be like, hey, can I just be a new person or something?
That's what my brother would do for me if I died, or for anyone, because he wouldn't want us to not play. So yes, we would probably just assume a new character. Okay. For sure, yes. But in our world, we have something. We have a wizarding academy, and they have plenty of resurrection spells. So all I would have to do is make my way there. So yeah, crazy. It's really, I'm telling you, it's the dungeon master's world. He's the puppet master. It's kind of like the Truman Show.
That's interesting. That movie. I just recently rewatched that movie a couple of months ago.
Did you? I have to.
It suddenly elevated itself. I don't know why. It's like when you get older, movies clap differently.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you perceive them than when you first saw it. And
definitely.
I don't know. That was definitely one of the movies that definitely changed the way I looked at things. But anyway.
Yeah.
Back to the whole fantasy type stuff.
Yeah.
So in that kind of a world, is that like, I'm trying to think of the way to phrase this. Where does a line of like the game and reality draw? Because I gotta imagine, like, I used to play video games as a kid, and if I was playing 2-player games with someone and they fucked up, I wouldn't talk to them for a week. I mean, granted, that's childish behavior, and as an adult, I probably wouldn't do that anymore. But I'm curious to know, have you experienced that? Do people get so in? Because you guys talk about you refer to each other as character names and this and that. Is there a line that gets stepped over sometimes where people maybe actually take it too personal? I'm not trying to judge it, because like there's a lot of assholes who will look at it and go, "Oh, these fucking dorks," blah, blah, blah. And that's not what I'm doing at all right now. I'm just asking. No, I get it. It is so immersive that I gotta imagine sometimes you might be able to lose yourself to it.
Yeah, and there's times. So again, it's like we have a pretty good group and we've all known each other for a long time, but there have been arguments, there have been bickering, and then you have to remember too that like, and yes, there are people who play. I've played with some very serious people who get very upset if you make mistakes, or there's a lot of stuff to remember. You know, I play with like notebooks and a Google Docs thing open and all this stuff. So, you know, you get the people who are pros at it, who have been playing their whole lives, who can get like that. But no, we're pretty good. We've had a few arguments, but we have to remember too, like, for instance, if you're just say you're in a castle and 3 of you are in one room and 2 of you are over there, you can't talk to those other 2 people because they wouldn't be able to hear you. So, you know what I mean? So if one of those people is having a turn, I'm like, well, why would you do that? I can't do that because I don't know what he's doing. So you have to remember that. And we have had little bickering things like, wait a minute, why would you do that? That's going to fuck us up. No. And then my brother would be like, wait, you guys can't talk to each other. What are you doing? You know,
I was about to say, do you guys have to like mute or something when somebody else is doing
and we'll
stuff?
do that. And then when we're in a fight or doing something with a clear objective, we're in turn order. But if we're just like exploring a town, we can talk and, but as our characters. So our characters will argue, and I actually have a little feud with one of the characters, not in real life, in the game. So there's times where I have to be mean to that character, and then always I'll like text him and be like, I didn't mean that, right? But we all, at this point though, like we're so deep into it that we're pretty good with that.
I gotta imagine that creates some pretty strong friendships.
Oh
It's
yeah.
like, it's
That's
almost
the other
like
part of
shared
this whole thing.
experiences. Yeah. Like,
and this is something like my brother has always talked about, like, and other people, like, this would be a great like after school club for kids. It doesn't matter what you look like, who you are, male, female, anything, what your background is. Like, you can be anybody you want in this game. And that's the cool thing.
And it's definitely a good way to, I guess I want to say, like, breed creative people.
Yeah.
And I got to imagine it also probably lends you to open your eyes to other perspectives. Like, if you're playing
definitely.
a character who's like completely different from your normal day-to-day self, you might be making decisions, which as a writer, when I sit down and write, I always have to, like, when I'm switching dialogue or scenes with different characters, I have to transport my brain from me to that particular character and try to empathize with that particular motive.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's kind
right.
of like when that old adage of the villain never thinks he's the villain. He thinks he's the hero of the story.
Right.
And it's that
That's
kind of
interesting.
mentality. So I feel like when you're playing something like D&D or any kind of role-playing game, I need to find out if there's others. But I got to imagine that's like a personal growth type thing that some people need to experience. So it's almost like it's more than just creative benefit. It's like personal growth. Like, you can really kind of find. Have you found anything like that in your experiences playing the game?
Absolutely. Like, this is going to sound so corny, but it's part of the reason why I wanted to learn martial arts. We had this talk the other day, and just like, I want to be a badass. And my character is a badass. She can handle herself. She doesn't rush into situations impulsively. She's strong. She can fight. She doesn't need other people. She can be alone. She can travel alone. And like, I do think about her sometimes. I think about her as a warlock and as a person, and just like, I know it's not a real person, but just like every other, all of my fantasy heroes, like, they all have that same thing in common. Like, they're strong. And so, yeah, absolutely. I have actually said to myself in my head, like, be Celeste. Don't be Tony right now. Be Celeste. Celeste wouldn't take this bullshit.
You know something? That is actually a really great way for people to develop things. When I was teaching martial arts, I always empathized with the scrawny little nerdy types because that had been me. And before I was able to get better at, hand-eye coordination and all that kind of stuff. And I would tell some of the people, one of my favorite students, I got down on one knee and I looked him in the eye. I said, who's your favorite superhero? And he was like, the Hulk. And I said, all right, when you are going to break this board, I don't want you to imagine that you're Willie. I want you to imagine that you are the Hulk, and you are Hulk smashing right through these boards. And, we had been trying to get him to break this board for so long, his heart just wasn't in it. But the moment he was allowed to change
Hulk.
gears in his brain, I'm not Willie, I'm the Hulk, he broke the board. I mean, it wasn't
That's
like
amazing.
first shot, but I had to amp him up. I was like, Hulk smash, come on, blah, blah, blah.
That's amazing.
It's very interesting that I've found more recently that when you are able to do something out loud, say something out loud, you're allowed to kind of accept it more. And you can do stuff, change stuff about yourself, and do stuff like that. And I got to imagine in the safety net of something like Dungeons and Dragons, you can take a chance that you normally wouldn't take in real life. And somehow your brain still reads that as you taking that chance. You know what I mean?
Like,
your brain
that's an interesting point.
Knows that, you're the one doing that, not the character. That's
a really interesting concept.
Like it's definitely, I the more I'm thinking or hearing you talk about this, it's like a very cathartic experience for people to be able to try stuff. And that sounds like it's, especially when you're an artist. And that's what I think is a good takeaway for our listeners, who are storytellers and artists, hopefully, is that, I'm always kind of harping on the idea of trying things, allowing yourself to fail, this and that. I guess a role-playing game kind of allows you to do that. And you also get to see other people react to it, which I think is everybody's biggest fear. Is, I mean, like you were talking before, it didn't hold you back. It wasn't the thing keeping you from playing, but a lot of people, you know, they have that kind of second perspective of, I don't want people to look at me weird, but but
it can also, in that same sense, like you were saying, it can help you gain confidence because, like I said, whenever you start, you have people around the table, you sit, and you're like, just like what's his name on Community said, Joel's character. What's his name of the Community?
Jeff Winger.
Jeff, yes. How did I forget that? And he's like, okay, well, what do I do? Can I do this? And it's weird and it's awkward. But then when you break that barrier and you're actually like, okay, I can role play and no one's making fun of me and this is what we do. It's like you can let go and it just, this confidence comes with it. So yeah, for me, it's more than just a game, I guess, as corny as that sounds.
It's not. I don't think that's corny at all because I think, and I know you'll agree with me on this, when you write something, or when anyone creates something, it's like having a baby. That thing you don't want anyone else to have it. You want to you know, just protect it, and it's yours, and you want to do whatever you want to do with it. It's a part of you. It's suddenly an extension of you, and I can understand the creative aspect of that. On the other hand, I could also see getting bored with the same character after several years and being like, can someone kill me? Because I need to start over.
Yeah. And I can see that too. I can see that too. You know, we get constrained in the character too, and with what they can do and their stats and all that kind of thing as well. But you can level up, and that's also at the DM's discretion. You know, he can be like, all right,
Pokemon, like you evolve into something else.
Yeah, like, okay, you guys have, you know, won this many battles or figured out this puzzle or something. My brother will put puzzles in the game too, and then so you'll level up, and then you'll have more spells to choose from, or more power, or higher armor class, different stats, things like that, more different weapons.
Wow.
Yeah.
This has been very eye-opening to me. I thought it was just, you know, first of all, I thought it was all medieval stuff. I didn't know that it could branch in so many different directions. We're going to have to find out if there's a horror movie one.
Oh, yeah. We got to YouTube that or something.
I want to be a killer. I just want to murder.
Yeah. Honestly, the next campaign I play, I want to be somebody completely opposite to myself. Like,
and that sounds, that's like a very actory thing to say, where it's like, you know, like people talk about being typecast, where they get tired of playing the same television role, and they want like, and you look at like a lot of Disney stars, smiling and cheesing and singing and dancing, and then all of a sudden, you know, Zac Efron goes from that to the Baywatch movie with this horrible, you know, humor, and he's just trying to, you know, turn himself into a sex symbol and all this kind of stuff. A lot of them do that, where they start going down that whole, I want to be seen differently kind of thing. I got to imagine it would be the same thing. It's kind of like me with Digits. I was kind of, my headspace was in Digits for so long. Yeah. And eventually I was like, we're going to do a sequel and do that. And then I was like, I got to get away from this. I got to do something different.
Well, as you said, it was like your child, you know, like you put your heart and soul into that. And it's like, you know, it's who you were for so long.
And it's easy to get lost in it too. And I'm not, I don't want to pass judgment on D&D players, but you know, like you said, it's cathartic and energizing to live through a different eyes, but at the same time, you can very easily kind of lose yourself to it. And that I think is a little bit of a warning. Now, I don't think it's like I said, satanic panic nonsense where people start going insane, like zero charisma level and all that jazz. But at some point, you do need to kind of reset and maybe go a different direction. But I'm curious to know, do you guys ever want it to end? Like, do you like at some point when you're watching a movie series, like I watch the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, and at some point you're like, can we wrap this up on a high note? Can we, or other, you know what I mean? It's like the television series that goes on for 6 seasons after they should have wrapped it up.
You mean like Walking Dead?
Listen, that fucking show went so many seasons after it should have it should have ended after season 1. But like for me, not yet, because we still have not reached our objective, and we have so much. There's so much left of the story, and we're so invested in these characters. Like I could see us playing probably throughout this year at least. Sure. But yes, at a certain point, it would be nice to reach a resolution
And perhaps like these characters, I'll always have this character and I'll dust her off and play her in another campaign sometime. But we all kind of, I think, want the opportunity to stretch our legs with other characters as well. But not anytime soon.
That's interesting, because you've been playing for 2 years now?
It'll be character? 2 years this August, yeah. Isn't that crazy? 2 years.
That's insane.
Yeah.
As the
and we
same
played
character.
in person at first, and we're planning on playing in person again. But I mean, I played an 8-hour game one time. Like, you look at the clock and you're like, oh my God, like, what's real life? It's just crazy.
Aside from like adult responsibilities, I never had friends that would be willing to go that long for things.
Oh God. And we're all in our freaking 30s. That's the best part. Like, my parents will be like, you guys still playing that? I gotta play this shit until I'm 75. Like, it's the best thing ever. You need it.
That's the thing about our generation, is I think there's a lot less fucks given about the expectation of quote unquote acting like an adult. I think
like,
that
what are we gonna do?
More.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
we're much more in tune with I'm gonna be a dork my whole life, and I'm gonna enjoy it, and I'm just gonna do it. Like, and it doesn't seem to bother me, and that's one of the things that I kind of love about our generation. One of the few things. But I'm so you're saying that you're not creatively exhausted yet with this particular character or the thing. So what kind of creative decisions do you make week to week, month to month, year to year? Do you go in with the idea of, I kind of want her to grow into this kind of character? Because like, it's kind of like that old adage of you can't make a character flawless. You know what I'm saying? Like, they have to have flaws to overcome, or otherwise things aren't interesting. So I have to imagine that you built flaws into her. Are there any particular flaws that you could let me know about? Or like, how did you go about coming about those decisions, and how are you creatively working through them as you do campaigns?
So I took it very seriously, because everybody starts at level 1. You get a few spells, you're not that great. So I took that seriously, to mean that she's a new witch. She just is learning this stuff. So her flaws are, she was very conceited, very headstrong, and not humble enough. So she would just run into a fight and be like, I'm a level 1 witch, I'll kill you. Like, no, bitch, you got killed. So I made Celeste now, like, it's very important to me that my character evolves, like you said, in character development, not just skills. So, as you level up, you get to pick, I get the creative choice to pick what spells I want from a really long list and what things I can do. But I also have to creatively decide how I interact with my fellow players. So like the last fight, I did a lot of hiding, a lot of readying a dodge, a lot of figuring out, like, when normally at level 1, I would just rush into something and get killed or get down to 0 HP. So, and we're all very, very good at that. Like, our characters have all, like, honestly matured.
Very interesting.
Yeah,
that was going to be my follow-up, was, has anybody else followed that lead?
Absolutely.
And that's got to be what keeps the dungeon master on his toes, I imagine. Yeah. Is, you know what I mean? Coming up with new things, because it's that kind of, one solution creates another problem.
Yes, and also that's happened. So I've played other campaigns that were much shorter with people that, not that they didn't like each other in real life, but they didn't agree with the decisions the characters were making, and it creates this weird tension. But we are very supportive of our characters, and like I said, there's a little bit of bickering, but pretty much every choice my friends make, I agree with. Like, we all are just so cohesive with this, and it helps that we're friends in real life too, obviously.
But you can jump into other players' games and like make a cameo or something.
Oh, you can, but I have played campaigns, I mean, like in the past, like before this campaign started. This was not the first campaign I did.
So it wasn't run by your brother?
No, the first campaign, my brother and I were players, and there was another DM, yes. And then my brother decided to become a DM and really get into it, yeah. I should have said that from the start.
I gotta imagine it gets kind of clicky.
Oh, yeah. Are you kidding me? Yeah.
I have to imagine that, because that's just the nature of things. Like,
oh, yeah.
So there's other campaigns that you guys are aware of, and there's there are people that you're like, boy, I wish, she would come and play with our campaign, but she's with them, or, what I mean? Like, is that one of those?
There's actually my friend's brother, my friend Ashley, her brother Mike. I've been trying to poach him for years, but he's in a campaign though, and he won't get out of it. But yeah, Mike, if you're hearing this, we need you.
So you can do that. You can like leave the campaign, like on a. And does the dungeon master have to work that into the story, or is it just like, oh,
No,
she
you
quit?
can do whatever you want. If I decided to, your character can do whatever
Do
you
you
want.
have to roll on that?
No, like I guess some assholes will make you do it, but my brother would just be like, "All right, we'll just write like Celeste, did this and got buried alive, and we're never gonna see her again. Sorry."
Wow.
My brother also does. He puts side characters in that will show up like months later. That like you seriously just have to be a fly on the wall for like an hour during one of our games.
I don't know if that's a story you can be just dropped into, right? You
Yeah,
have
you'd
to
be
get the
pretty
backstory.
confused, but
That's like,
and my brother
that'd be like,
keeps notes. I have notes. Like this could be a fantasy story one day. Don't think I haven't thought of that.
but who owns the copyright? That's the real question.
I know.
That's
take
a
all
creative legal loophole that you'd have to get through. I don't know how that would work actually.
Yeah,
because,
yeah.
I wouldn't even want to think about that. I would definitely take things from it, like inspiration.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if I would take straight story from it.
No, this character I will take with me at some point.
Because you would definitely own her, absolutely.
Yeah. And I wouldn't keep it all the same. Like I wouldn't have all like the, everything on this sheet. It would just be what I wrote about her, carried on.
I think you should. I think that's like,
yeah.
I mean, obviously you've lived in her shoes for so long that
maybe I should do
decisions. The only problem I think you might have is going back and starting from when she had the flaws, because your mindset now is so different from when you probably started. I could imagine that.
Think of another storyline.
Yeah, something along that line. Or I mean, it doesn't even have to be that particular character. It could be that persona in a different story. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
In one of the last episodes of the podcast, we were talking about creating characters, and I talked about how I would, take Willy Wonka and the Joker and the Crypt Keeper and mix them into one character, and that was the Griever.
See, okay.
And like that's how I built a character. You know what I mean? So like
that's interesting.
That to me, like what you have there though are building blocks to take a character that you already know, and you could put her shoes on anybody else and make decisions she would make and stuff like that. You could put her in The King. I don't know. I
like this. I like where it's going.
Because and we can kind of deviate. We're going a little bit over time, but we always do that here. Writer's block is definitely a thing that everybody experiences, and me and you talk about this all the time. So I'm curious, A, do you get hit with creative blocks when you're playing Dungeons and Dragons where you're just like, I don't know what to do right here? And then also, we can talk about the King story a little bit, because I mean it's fantasy, so we'll get into that. But answer that first question first, like creative blocks while you're playing the game.
Interestingly enough, it's very rare that I get a creative block while playing this. And I'm like, I get blocked all the time. I can't think of stories. I never finish things. But there's something different about this. So usually I'm good. Usually I know. There's sometimes if a battle is happening where I'm like, oh God, it's my turn. What do I do here? But it's half. I don't know if I want to say like give it a percentage, but it's also luck of the roll. So you don't know what's going to happen. So, but yeah, I get far less blocked playing this than I do writing. Are you trying to hack my brain?
No, but I just had a crazy idea, and I'm curious to know what your thoughts on it would be. Have you ever considered setting the degree of difficulty for things that happen in your writing, and then rolling dice to see if it would happen or not, and allowing that to dictate how you
I didn't
would write
expect
a story?
you to say that. Wow.
I did. That just flew into my brain as we were talking here, but like as a writing process, do you know what I mean? Like instead of just shooting from the hip and kind of going with whatever flows out of you at the moment, have you ever thought about stopping, saying, all right, I got to roll a 12 or higher for this to happen? Like the king wants to jump out the window and, hopefully land in the lake. Roll the dice. All right, he didn't land in the lake, so maybe he landed in the tree. And then, you know what I mean? Like then you have to kind of build your own story that way. I'm challenging you now to try this. Right. Only because like you talk about like there are things that kind of hang you up with writer's block and you don't know what to do, you don't know the story. So I'm curious to know if incorporating like a D&D element that doesn't seem to stymie you at all,
Yeah,
if
that
you
could be a
rolled the
creative
dice,
hack.
maybe that could just be a way around yourself and getting outside of your head and just being like, okay, that won't happen now. And like, because there's a lot of, when you're writing, I mean, everybody says this when they're watching a movie. It's like, I don't believe that happened. Look at the luck that happened there. And, you know, it
Right.
ruins that suspension of disbelief. But I feel like if you were able to comfortably set that number on the die that it had to hit for that to happen, then you could roll the dice and be like, okay, well then that's not happening, or that happened, oh my god. And that would kind of maybe balance out the
I like that.
fortunes
It's kind
happen
of
in
like
storytelling.
a creative hack. I like that. I mean, and definitely if I'm going back to the King's story, if I play it like a D&D thing, like if I play it like that's my character, like where am I? What am I going to do? Where am I going to go? Yeah, like wow, I think you just hacked my brain, man.
Listen. For those of you who aren't up on it, me and Tony pen pal, God, it's been at least 5 years now, I think.
Yeah, hold on, terrible.
Hey, we all have lives. But like, you know, we're constantly talking about just ways to get around yourself with writing and all that kind of stuff. And I am forever trying to help you out. Not that I don't, and you know, hit my own problems with the writing and getting over those humps and stuff, but I that's just the way my mind works now when I talk to you, is like, how can I help Tony today? And let's try this. It's a creative exercise for myself to just try to do that. And
just the
you know,
emails help.
You know what? It does sometimes too, because that's a double-edged sword though sometimes, because yes, you get in the groove of just sitting down and writing,
right?
But then on the same time, you also are using up that creative energy. Even when you're nonfiction writing, talking about normal life stuff, it's one of those things. Like I've talked about in this podcast, some directors, writers, all those kinds of people who make creative decisions have said, and I think there's been a scientific study behind this, that you only have so much creative power in you per day. So they will already, like on a Sunday, they will pick out all the t-shirts they're wearing that week, and they won't deviate from it, because in the morning, if you're making a decision of, do I wear that shirt or this shirt, you're using up some of that juice that they could be using writing. And
that's
so,
interesting.
like, I'm curious to know, where was I going with this? I was going somewhere with this, and now I don't remember.
Using up creative energy.
I don't know, just getting over writing blocks, I guess. Because that I guess that's not a creative. That's keeping you from using that creative decision of, would the king land in the pond or the tree?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, you don't have to. You're not.
But
you're not going 12 steps ahead of yourself, going, well, if he lands here, blah 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 blah. You only roll, and then you know what happens, and then you have to figure it out. It's not two different paths you're figuring out. It's just that one.
Right.
So it's saving you creative energy. I think there's
also an element, of like bouncing creativity off of other people too with D&D. Like when I'm alone by myself at my desk just writing, it's like I'm at a war with myself. But when I have a dungeon master and this person and this, I'm much better, which is why I reach out to you about it too. Like I'm like a social creative, I guess. That's
a great phrase. I like that.
Like I always say, I could never be a stand-up comedian, but I'm really funny in a group.
That's fair.
You know?
It's one of those things where I think, because you're self-evaluating how the audience reacts. That's when you're trying things. You know what I mean? Because I'll sit there at night and I'll go, that's really fucking funny. And it's hilarious to me. And then I'll turn around and say it to somebody the next day or whatever. And they'll be like, huh? That sucked. Never mind. And but to have that instantaneous feedback, you're allowed to kind of know if you're on the right path. I think a lot of artists struggle with the idea that when you have an instinct that you're trying to follow, and we talked about this on an instinct episode, you don't know what everyone else is thinking. And that's part of the struggle as an artist, is that we're constantly trying to connect with others through a different mode of communication that most normal people operate on. And it's a lot of I don't want to call it try and failure. What's the phrase I'm looking for?
Trial and error?
Trial and error. Thank you. It's a lot of that. So I think that's what D&D kind of allows you to do. I think we kind of were touching on that earlier.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up, I'm curious to know if you have any other insight as to how playing D&D might help someone as an artist, or in any kind of art form. Doesn't matter what it is. Is there anything that you think would apply unilaterally throughout any kind of artistic medium that you think is worthwhile for people listening who haven't played D&D that might be able to take something from it?
I mean, I think what D&D proposes is what we had talked about this whole time is creative choices. And as an artist, with whatever medium you're using, whether it's writing, screenwriting, music, actual art, dance, anything, like you're making in every moment creative choices. And when you can harness that and get control of it, it builds confidence, it builds creativity, and it sort of, I think, unblocks those blocks a little bit, if that makes sense.
Probably reveals style quite a bit too.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yes.
Because I'm sure you probably noticed that when you're with your party. I mean, like, there's people who are, like you say, yes, you don't disagree with decisions that other people make, but at the same time, I'm sure there's a part of you that goes, wow, I didn't think of that. Or, like, I'm sure those moments have happened.
All the time. I'm impressed by their creative choices all the time, continually. There's things that I wouldn't have chosen myself and think, I would probably leave that out, and things that I say, oh my God, why didn't I think of that? So again, it's like that social aspect of bouncing the creativity off of other people and having it mirrored back to you, and it's collaborative and it's awesome. So that, I think, for people like me who do thrive in that sort of creative environment, I think it would definitely boost creativity. But above all, I think just the confidence to be able to make a creative choice and to be rewarded by it,
I think that's the big takeaway. We've talked about this on the podcast before, but I am constantly in search of the validation of the creative endeavor. And that's part of the reason why I'm constantly posting food pictures, is because I just want the attention and the validation that I'm doing something artistically that other people give a shit about.
Right.
And I gotta imagine that means something the same in D&D, where you're making a decision and the rest of your party's like, yes, good job. Like, and that, like you said, builds confidence. And I guess that's the thing that artists are looking for when they're doing their art, is that confidence. There's always going to be an uneasiness, an uncertainty of what's going to happen. But I feel like, and I don't want to call D&D practice, but it is kind of practice for the creative approach, the creative system, the creative process of, like you said, making decisions, trial and error, the rewards that come with it, finding style of, what you do, what you wouldn't do, what you like, what you don't like, thinking outside of the box, looking at it from different perspectives. There's I honest to God, I feel like anyone listening to this that hasn't played Dungeons and Dragons and considers themselves an artist or a storyteller, it's probably worth your while to play it for like a month or two. Get a bunch of people and just do it. Yes. Is there any kind of resources you could recommend for people other than like books? Is there like I gotta imagine there's like web forums or Facebook groups or some crazy shit like
there's
that.
a ton. I would recommend, if you don't want to go out and just like buy the books, buy the player handbook. The player handbook is the Bible. But if you don't want to do that, I would just go on YouTube and watch a game. Just watch how they play, because that's how you learn. Yeah.
They put them on YouTube.
Oh my God. Just go on YouTube, Google Dungeons and Dragons. You'll Google whatever. Look how old I am. YouTube Dungeons and Dragons. YouTube and you'll find tons and tons of videos.
Awesome. Toni, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
We're definitely going to have you back. There's other topics that I definitely want to have you weigh in on.
I'd love to.
But this has been a very dorky but awesome episode at the same time. Again, my usual co-host, Mr. Matt Rainwater, is out, and we send all our love to him and his family and to everyone who was affected by all the flash flooding and stuff that happened in Louisiana. We hope you're good, buddy. I hope everyone down there has remembered to save your art in backups and stuff like that, and I'm sure Rainwater's going to attest to that when he comes back. But definitely, thank you again so much for coming on, Toni.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I loved it.
For this episode, I'm going to say goodbye and go play Dungeons & Dragons, but first go watch Community, because obviously Toni will verify that fucking episode was amazing. The show in general is amazing. At some point, and also, Toni, we're going to have you come back on, because I am planning a horrific October season on the podcast. I can't wait. And there's nobody I would rather talk about horror with than you, because that is one of the other topics. Like we were talking about a horror D&D type thing.
I can wax poetical.
Horror movie shit that me and Toni could talk about. That episode will go for like 6 hours, but I promise it would be fucking awesome. And if we end up doing a horror D&D thing, we will definitely come back on here and talk about it and talk about. I don't know if I could do the Dungeon Master on that. I don't.
No, we'll
there's
get
so
one.
so many different things that you could play in that. You could be the final girl. You could be, I don't know what a Dungeon Master would be called. God? Or,
just the omnipotent, omniscient power that, I don't know. It depends. You could go so many directions.
But like, what would be the party? I guess would have to be survivors, right?
Yeah. It would probably have to be a party of humans. Maybe we could throw, like, I don't know, a wizard in there or something that doesn't reveal he's a wizard.
Flip the switch and be like a party of monsters just trying to kill everybody, or that would be fun to do.
I mean, creative choice, man. You got the choice.
That sounds like fun, and I'm gonna leave it there. And that's an awesome idea. If you guys have anything, do you have anything you want to plug, Tony? Any kind of, because I know you have your poem Instagram, which you sparsely update.
Yeah, at this point, I'm working on a few things, and when I get a few things written, I'll plug them then for sure.
Okay, we're definitely gonna have you back, so try and have something ready to plug.
I will.
But for this episode, I have been Zhao. Thank you guys for tuning in to Midnight at the Spaghetti Factory, and we will see you next week. Take care, everybody.
Bye.